I'd like to do two things today. One is to review very quickly a theory of change, which we found very amenable to the Anisa-Model, and which we have used to plot our own progress along the path of certain change through Project Inspire. Havelock's theory of change, and dwell on two parts of the change process, namely problem formation and problem solution, drawing on the work of several theorists who have found Whitehead and Russell's work in mathematics. And it applies to a conceptual way of looking at change. And since, as you know, the Anisa system is derived philosophically largely from the work of Alfred North Whitehead, this notion of change I found very exciting and very instructive. First, Havelock. Havelock says that when in a social system you want to have change, there are a number of stages that you inevitably go through in order to accomplish that change. The first is establishing relationship with the people that you're going to help implement the change. And the idea is that if that relationship isn't there, there is no what I call bond of teachability or collaboration, and nothing will get done. In fact, there will be active undermining of what you're trying to accomplish. The second thing is participating with everybody in identifying the needs, or making a diagnosis, or spotting what it is you want to modify by deciding what direction you want to go in. And third is acquiring all the resources you need in order to move things along that pathway. Stage 4 is choosing the solution. In other words, you see you want to get from here to there, and that represents a number of difficulties and problems and issues. You have to make a decision on how you're going to get that all together in order to make the move. Once you've decided what the solution will be, then there's the problem of gaining acceptance. And finally, there is a period or a stage of stabilization and self-renewal. I'm looking very briefly from the annual evaluation report for last year in Project Inspire, where it looks at this, and indicates that we're sort of roughly in stage 5 and stage 6, where people have had information disseminated to them. We sort of have an idea of the direction we want to go in terms of a solution, and on the basis of having information and a little bit of experience, acceptance is beginning to take place. Actually, any given person in a system that's undergoing change may be in a wildly different stage than somebody else. Some people may be in stage 1, they haven't even got a relationship going yet. And there will be some people who've already internalized the whole thing and are raring to go. And the idea is to not get everybody strung all the way out if you could help it, but to try to more or less move in a rhythm through all of the stages somewhat together. In my experience, it hardly ever happens that way, because you never have enough resources and enough time in order to really manage it. Now, the particular thing I want to dwell on today has to do with formulating the problem and adopting the solution, creating the solution, using this new approach that's been put together by a number of people who have found Whitehead's and Russell's theory of logical types very useful. I'm going to be drawing heavily on a book called Change by a man named Watzlawick, W-A-T-Z-L-A-W-I-C-K, if you ever want to read a fascinating book, and his colleagues Weakland and Fish, F-I-S-C-H. Paul, you were going to have a little pen down. Did you find that pen? I think I saw it as the doorstop, actually. Well, maybe I don't need to write it down, I guess. Now, when you think of problem formation, you have to keep in mind that knowing what a problem is, or knowing that a problem exists, is one thing, and knowing what the problem is another. Usually in a system, you may have a large number of people actually knowing that something is wrong somewhere. In fact, you've heard people say that, well, I don't know, but something is wrong somewhere. So they know the problem exists. The next step is to know what the problem is. That's the problem formation, as these people see it. Then there is the problem resolution. Doing anything different from what you used to do is one thing. But doing something different that really creates a permanent change is another thing. So what we want to focus on is finding out what actually the problem is after you've been aware that there is one, and then doing something that is different such that it actually creates the sort of change that you want that really gets rid of the problem. Two of the most prevalent questions you hear, if you keep your ears open, is number one, how does this undesirable situation continue to persist? And secondly, what can we do about it? One of the things that no doubt you've experienced, I've experienced, everybody I know has experienced it, is that people keep making efforts to change. And sometimes the more efforts you make, the more it just turns out to be the same. You might shuffle the names on the above the door. A few people might come, a few people might go. But when you come right down to it, things are pretty much the same. This is particularly true if you are looking at impact on children in school. Time and time again, we've seen all kinds of shuffling and changes going on in various places, but in terms of what happens to the children, no difference. Now, I suppose it's pretty obvious that a situation is a problem only if it is perceived as one, at least by that person, by the perceiver. And all problem formulations and resolutions depend upon perception and thought. And all perception and thought are relative. They operate by comparison and contrast. If you can't see two things as different when in fact they are, that may be where your problem is. I think it was, I don't know if it was Gregory Bateson or who it was, made the point. No, it was Benjamin Lee Whorf, the great linguist and anthropologist, who said, a universe where everything is blue will not have people in it who can form the concept blueness, because there is nothing to compare it with. It won't even enter the minds of blueness. Now somebody else said, a fish would be the last creature to discover water because he has nothing to compare it with. It's just there. Unless, of course, he's had a little stint of a few seconds outside of water that he may know. So effective problem formation and resolution depends on getting the right comparisons and the right contrasts. To help us get the right comparisons and the right contrasts, we need kind of a theory or a guide. And that's where Whitehead comes in, and where the general theory of groups. I want to talk about two theories now, a theory of groups and a theory of logical types, and show you how most people implicitly draw upon a theory of groups to plan their change, and that's why they don't get any change. and why you have to jump to Whitehead and Russell's theory of logical types in order to make the change. And after I explain this to you a little bit, I want to have you do some exercises which will demonstrate very graphically to you what I'm talking about. The basic postulates of group theory concern the relationships between elements or parts in the wholes to which they belong. A group, according to this theory of groups, has 4 properties. I'm just going to go through them very briefly. First of all, a group is composed of members which are all alike in at least one common characteristic. It doesn't matter what the group is. It can be numbers, ideas, events, people, tastes, flavors, temperatures, whatever. Secondly, the group may combine members in varying sequences, yet the outcome of the sequence will remain the same. This is what they call changeability through the process, but invariance in the outcome. I've known a lot of people, for instance, who say, look, I'm going to save more money. I'm going to re-budget. They shuffle around how much they spend on everything, but at the end of the month, they spend exactly the same amount. Now, that's an example of how you may get different sequences within what, in this case, how you use your money. And you made a lot of changes, and you put a lot of effort into it, because now you aren't buying any clothes now, but you suddenly find that you've done something else with it, and at the end of the month, the outcome was exactly the same. Now, many people, these guys, incidentally, these 3 guys were therapists, and they found they used to do an awful lot of talking. They tried this, they tried that, they tried everything else, and they came at exactly the same point. The patient was still psychotic, the patient was still depressed, the patient was whatever, which is to say. Thirdly, a group has what they call an identity member, such that when you combine that identity member with any other member, it yields that member. For instance, in mathematics, when you have a system where that is based on the additive principle, 0 is the identity member. So when you have 5 plus 0, you still get 5. If you have a system that's based on the multiplicative principle, then 1 is the identity member. So when you have 1 times 5, you still get 5. The instructive characteristic of this feature of a group is that a member can act without making any difference. And you may have felt, I know, for instance, people in marriages who feel like this cannot go on. I mean, this terrible situation must be remedied. And actually, lots of things were tried, but they still right back where they were. Finally, number 4, every member has its reciprocal or opposite, such that any combination of a member with its opposite yields the identity number. So 5 plus or minus 5 equals 0. Now, these 3 gentlemen who were actually therapists, it was very interesting. They got fed up with day in and day out of hearing people's problems and seeing after all this effort and trying this and that and everything else exactly the same. I see you nodding your head over there. Well, I mean, we've all had that experience. And so every now and again, one of them would try something kind of silly and seemingly stupid, just on a kind of intuitive impulse, and found that an enormous change would take place. And they were gaining such success by doing this that they set up a whole little experimental thing somewhere else where their establishment type operation could be protected with going on doing the same thing that doesn't work and getting well paid for it. And they tried these funny things over here, sort of on the side in the alley, back away from where their professional colleagues would take a peek at them. But the news leaked out that they were really doing some interesting things. and their colleagues wanted to know why it worked. And they could not explain why it worked. And this is what caused them to indulge in a rather deep theoretical inquiry into the nature of what they were doing, so they could explain to others why they were getting the change in this case and not this case. And after going through all this inquiry, they came to these two theories, a theory of groups and a theory of logical types, and they found that analogically provided the explanation. So the theory of groups shows how persistence and change can be understood. See, those are those two fundamental questions you always hear. Why is this terrible situation persisting, and how can we change it? The theory of groups specifically shows how particular changes within the group can in fact take place without making any difference in the system as a whole. And you see, if your problem is in the system as a whole, then fussing around with individuals, shuffling people around within it, will not get you to change. You formulated the problem wrongly, and therefore you can't create the solution. Group theory will not account for the type of change that transcends the system. For that, you need Whitehead and Russell's theory of logical types, which will account for it. Now, the central axiom of the theory of logical types is this: whatever involves all of a collection, doesn't matter what the collection is, ideas, events, objects, people, whatever involves all of a collection cannot be one of the collection. Now, that is so abstract as to be befuddling to people who aren't dealing in abstractions at least 5 hours a day. Let me give you an example. You could say mankind is the collection of all individuals. But mankind is not an individual, so he cannot belong to that class. Because mankind does not have the attribute of an individual. It is an abstractive quality, one level up. In other words, if your class is a bushel of apples, then the bushel itself cannot be a member, because the bushel is not an apple. Now, people are not used to making this kind of distinction, and because they do not make this distinction, they usually cannot formulate the problem properly and arrive at a solution. Let me bring it a little closer to home here. Superintendents, principals, and department heads are members of a class called administration. But administration is not a member of that class. Here's another one. School board is the class for the collection of board members, but the board itself is not a member. That's something else. It's elected by the community. In other words, a thing that belongs, well, give me another one. The teaching staff is a class made up of teachers, but the staff is not a member conceptually of that group. It has other properties. See, and it's the separation of these two classes that are so important. According to these people, confusion about change arises out of thinking in which the paramount distinction between member and class is not made, and a failure to recognize that a class cannot be a member of itself. It's what I think Bateson calls the confusion of levels problem. here's an example from Bateson. That I find that it's a pleasure to the mind to hear Bateson's examples. He took the most familiar form of change. What would you say the most familiar form of change is in the universe? Motion. Motion means simply change of position. This hand is here, now it's here. And then he says, but motion itself is subject to change. In what way can motion be subject to change? Can you think of a way? Pardon? Pardon?
Speed.
Yeah. It can be accelerated or it can be decelerated. It means it gets slower. Acceleration and deceleration are changes on a different level. It is a change of the change. Here is a change in position. Here's a change in the position characterized by increasing speed. Here's a change in position characterized by decreasing speed. What they call a meta change. Then he goes one point higher. He said there can be a change in the acceleration. The acceleration can be speeded up. In other words, it can get faster. There can be a change in deceleration because it can get slower faster. You see some eyes are going like this. But you know what, if something is getting slower faster, you know what that means. Never mind. This is a change of a change of a change. This is a meta change. Now, if you don't know on what level your problem is, you will be fussing around, putting a lot of energy into nothing that's going to happen to make any real difference. I've really become so enthused about this. I was asked to come up to Winnipeg, Canada, last year, and it's very interesting. Many northern Canadian cities are now going through what American cities went through 15 years ago. And in Winnipeg, all the Canadian Anglo types are moving out to the suburbs, and the native Indians are moving in, with all the problems in the inner city of crime and problems in schools and delinquency and truancy and migrancy and all of that. And they said, this situation, this undesirable situation, how can it persist? And what can we do to change it? So, I don't know how they heard of Anisa, but somebody did. So I was invited up for 4 or 5 days to work with all of the principals of all of the schools in the city of Winnipeg, and assistant principals and the superintendents and board members. So it was the administrative bunch in the whole city of Winnipeg who, if they wanted to, had the power to do things. And on one day, I broke them down and had them all just brainstorm about things they thought they could do. And later I was able to show that everything they proposed fit into the theory of groups. It was a mere shuffling of parts around and had no hope whatever of solving the problem they had. And so later I had to put them through some exercises, and then we did get 1 or 2 groups who managed to apply the theory of logical types and came up with some extraordinary proposals. The others who couldn't see the application of the theory were stunned by their proposals and were shocked that they could come up with them, and yet had to confess that there just may be something to them. And it was interesting that the 2 groups that did manage to apply the theory have a certain vitality about them. Because it's like, climbing up the mountain and seeing down the other side. And all your life you've only seen one side of the mountain. So there's something exhilarating by having a peek onto the other side. Now, there are two important conclusions to be drawn from the theory of logical types. These logical levels must be kept strictly apart. Otherwise, you will have paradox and confusion. And the problem with paradox is it just paralyzes you. And secondly, going from one level to the next higher level, in other words, going from the member of a class to the class, entails a shift, a jump. It is a way out of the previous system. And if that's where your problem is, then that's where you need to address your energies. So let me just summarize. Group theory gives a way of thinking about the kind of changes within a system that in itself will remain invariant. The theory of logical types gives us a way of thinking about the relationship of member to class and the change that can take place when one shifts to the next level up. And I now feel that being able to make that shift is an important ingredient in leadership, and to be able to articulate the shift and get everybody else to see it. Because if you don't have that ability, then you're really not going to be leading anybody anywhere. You'll just be going around and around and around. They'll be following you, and you'll be following them, and nobody knows who's leading whom. The first kind of change is a within-system change without changing the system. I'm being redundant and repeating myself so that I'm trying to get these two notions down. The second kind of change changes the system itself. The first type of change is called a first-order change. The second type is called a second-order change. It's a change of change, a meta-change. And for complex systems and most of the kinds of problems and issues we're dealing with, we need to be on the second-order change level. Because usually we're not so bugged by things within a system. We don't mind shuffling things around in there. And that doesn't bring us too much of a problem. Usually our real problems come from the persistence of something which won't go away in spite of lots of different things we're trying. Now, systems who try to change themselves rarely do so because they operate on principles that are applicable to members and not to the class. According to these guys, they are caught in what they call a game without an end. The game just goes on and on and on and on and on. And the reason it won't work is that the system cannot produce the rules for the change in its own rules, which will enable it to get out of the game. Now, there is a very clear case of that in our own Constitution. We have a rule which permits people to talk a piece of legislation to death until it won't pass. It's called the filibuster. Now, every time we try to get that filibuster rule changed, somebody filibusters it to death. That's a game without an end. The system is incapable of getting itself out of that bind, because the way it is set up, it is unable to create the rule that will enable it to alter its own rule. And several times, we've tried to get rid of the filibuster principle, and it's always filibustered to death. Now, the occurrence of a second-order change has been baffling. It seems to occur spontaneously, without intention. It seems unpredictable and illogical. And that's what these guys kept discussing about their own successes. Incidentally, this new little clinic that they set up over here was called a quick therapy clinic. Because once they got it, they didn't know it at the time we were renewing, but once they hit onto this next level up and proposed something there, therapy took place very quickly. That's why they called it quick therapy. I mean, just in a matter of a few days. No, they didn't have 100% success with it. And one of the reasons that they didn't is that they didn't know what principles they were applying. They were proceeding intuitively, which is not a bad way to proceed if you haven't got any other way to proceed. But then, if you're a scientist, you want to know if it works, why it works, so you can explain it to somebody else. And the interesting thing is that the solution always seemed puzzling to them until they got this, understood this theory of logical types. And in any case, even before they got that theory and applied it, they found that when the solution that they proposed that worked quickly was analyzed, it seemed in many cases terribly simple and quite understandable, but only when you see it from the perspective of the second level. When you try to perceive it from the perspective of the first level, it will remain puzzling and baffling. Now, I want to put you through a couple of exercises that will imprison you in the theory of groups as an operating framework. And of course, your task is to get out of the prison by jumping to the second order change level. And you see, I shouldn't even tell you that, because now this increases the probability of your success, and I want you to experience the frustration. Laura, you were going to separate these before your score. Now, I'm going to give you one. I think I even talked with you about it before, but the interesting thing is, even if you have once seen the second order change solution and time passes, when you come back to the problem, chances are you will have regressed to the first order change level, and you will say to yourself, doggone it, I used to know what the second order level change was, but now I don't. This is called the 9-dot problem. You know what it is? Oh, this doesn't seem to be working very well. I don't think you can see that, can you? Make 9 dots like this on your paper. And I'm going to frame for you. Can you all see that? I'm going to frame, this is the system you're in, and the problem that is persisting for you is that you are trying to get all of these dots connected by 4 straight lines without lifting your pen. And you can't retrace a line. Just 4 straight lines. I'm going to get it bigger. No peeking. I'm making it bigger. That's not the solution. It's 4 straight lines. Besides, this doesn't connect them. May I see the hands of anybody who's got it? Josh, you've been cheating. I don't know where or how. Are you ready for the answer? Now, the reason you can't do it... No, it's not impossible. It's because you are thinking within the system. And of course, I didn't tell you how you had to think. All I said is you just have to connect these 4. That's your problem, is connecting these 4 lines. And you think that the solution is to be formulated and found within the system, and you didn't jump out of the system. One, 2, 3, 4. These are the parts that went out of the system. Right here. See, now, if I collected all your papers and looked at everything you tried, I would have found attempts, none of which worked. Because you brought to this problem, this issue, a set of presuppositions that you didn't even know you were operating on. And this is one reason why change is so difficult to come by. Is that the people in the system don't even know what their limiting presuppositions are. And one of the things I'm interested in doing as a part of the development of the administrative part of the Anisa-Model is to find a group consultation way of raising to a level of conscious awareness what those limiting presuppositions are. And to get them out. Because once you're out of the system, then you're free to try 150 other things. And it's very interesting. These guys were making a presentation on this, and one of their friends said, I can connect them all in 3 straight lines. And you try that now. They have to be connected and the 3 straight lines have to be connected. You're connecting all the dots by 3 straight connected lines.
Connected.
Well, if they're continuous, they're connected, right?
No angle terms, she means.
No, they have to be straight.
She means, can it form angles?
Oh, I see. You mean you might have a T-bar. But I said without lifting the pen from the paper. Oh. Yeah, you can't lift the pen from the paper. No. So what you did is 1, 2, 3, 4. I see. Yes. Yes.
It's possible.
Yes. With God and intelligence, all things are possible.
One is missing.
Yes, I think intelligence is the more important action of puzzles like this. I don't think I can do it on this sheet either. Here's what his solution was. First of all, he made his dots very fat. And he starts way up here, and he hits that one right there. He hits that one in the middle, and he hits that one right there. And he goes way down here, and then he comes up, hits that one right there, hits that one right there, connects that one right there, and goes way up like this, and he hits this one right here, that one in the middle, and that one right there. So, what was the limiting presupposition there?
Size of the dot.
Well, not only the size of the dot, but the line would have to go through the center of the dot. You see, but that wasn't part of the problem. Yes, sir?
Can't you do it in one line?
Well, one straight line?
Yeah.
Have you seen this book?
No.
Because I'm going to show you how to do it in one line too. You want to come up and do it in one line?
Well, I can share my paper. What you have to do is you have to pull your paper so all the dots overlap. And if you look at the light, you can see right through them.
That's one way. Now, they sent this off to another friend who said, I can do it in one line. He didn't have you see, you have another one. This is not the light theory. But this guy, and they gave him what they call the Smart Ass Award for the year. They were so teed off with him. But if I unfold this, it took me a long time to get it all folded up. But you see, they're my 9 dots, right? You get this all folded up like that. And then they're all close together. And then you put it like that. You now have all 9 dots lined up, and you can run the line right through it. And now you're connecting all 9 dots with one line. So that's sort of the tack you took, because I didn't say you couldn't fold the paper. And I have a feeling that the way we teach youngsters in schools trains them to make limiting presuppositions, because most children would be sent to the office if they did this, being impertinent, because the creative solutions, chances are, would tend to be punished because we have convergent notions of thinking, because it is difficult to grade an exam which is not based on convergent thinking. See, an exam that has 5 equally possible answers is taxing for the teacher to deal with, and computers don't manage it very well, and optical scan machines don't handle it very well. See? So, well, let me give you another one, just to, now that you know, what you want to do is to think for a moment and write down what your limiting presuppositions are. And the doggone problem with me is that they tend to block the possibility of looking at an alternative. That's why I think there has got to be a group consultation method for challenging. All right, here's the problem. You get to add one line to that and change the number.
Is it a presupposition to say it has to be a Roman numeral?
Yes, it is. Did you hear what she said? This will give you a great insight. She says, is it one of those, I'm putting an adjective in, stupid presuppositions that it has to be a Roman numeral? I said yes. Because I didn't say that. I just said add one line and change the number. Yeah. You did it, and you left a Roman numeral, didn't you? So what was your presupposition that you got rid of? That you had to, that you could not turn it upside down. That's actually the solution I came to in the whole crowd. Nobody else, they were going on another thing. I added another one here and turned it upside down and got 12. So that was a presupposition that most people just automatically assume. But you can do it another way, on the grounds of her presupposition. In other words, for a moment, stop thinking Roman. And for a moment, stop thinking numeral. And for a moment, stop thinking straight, because I didn't say a straight line. So the reason you can't get that is that you have three presuppositions that tie you in knots. First of all, you think it's got to be Roman. Second of all, you think it's got to be a number. Second of all, I mean a mathematical symbol rather than the verbal expression of the symbol. And thirdly, you think the line has to be straight. And that's because the other lines are Roman, and they're straight, and they are numerals. So if you go on only what's obviously there, you won't arrive at the solution. Let me give you one other one. And move any one of those numbers to make the equation right. You can move just one. Now, let's list what some of the presuppositions might be. Roman numeral.
Straight.
Right, straight lines. It's one trial learning.
But you can't turn it upside down.
You can't turn it upside down. These might all be limiting presuppositions. As it turns out, I've selected one for which all those presuppositions are inoperative. What would be another presupposition? Is that my direction should be clear. You have to move the number, but you can't take it off the page.
Can you straighten?
I don't even think if you could move one off the page.
Can you straighten something out?
Each one of these units has to be left intact. You just get to move one, and you have to leave it on the page. I don't think even if you took some off the page, you could get it equal. Yes? Can you think of any other presuppositions?
If they would have to be joined for the
You got the answer.
I did put it.
Subtract.
She said-
Change it to a function.
That's right. Change it to a function. So you take this line here and put it there, and you have the square root of 1 equals 1. So now I don't know if you got the function. Did you get the function changed? No. You see, you got the idea of horizontal.
Yeah, I did, but I didn't know what.
The square root sign was,
Way
you
you
see.
did it.
Yeah. She got the function idea. You had the line idea. Actually, the line idea, if you'd known the function, the minute you get the idea, moving it, you did not have to leave it vertical. You could shift it and put it on its side. Could now make a function out of part of that, and that would make your equation. Yes? Exactly. Yeah, you could. I mean, I never thought of that. So what did you come up with?
We came up with 6 is not equal
6 is not equal
to
to 1.
But that's a diagonal line. You can still do that.
That's all right. You could do that. Very good. I'm going to make a little note of that. See, anybody else got any imaginative? You good to see. So you had 6. No, you just left it 7, didn't you? And took one of the equal sign lines and moved it.
That would be a plus, you'd have to.
Oh, no, yeah, that's right. It has to be that. That's right. It's just a matter
It's not
of...
it's a true statement. but
It's a true
not
statement, yeah. I said, and you have to keep the equation.
It's not an equation,
It's
but
not an
it's a true
equation anymore,
statement.
but still, it was very imaginative. You get A+ nonetheless. Now,
Not quite smart as of you.
We're on videotape.
Okay.
now, I'm very enthusiastic about the possibilities of this system being used to deal with all kinds of problems. The big difficulty is recognizing those presuppositions and finding out what the alternatives are. Now, the thing that will help you think what the alternatives are is when you apply the logical theory of types, you know you must move up from a member of a class to the class itself. He gives an example here, which could be a little embarrassing, but they say it anyway. And since they're psychiatrists, they can chide themselves. They're all from Stanford, so they're from reputable places. They said the premise of psychiatry is that understanding the cause of a symptom will make it go away. And they said time after time and study after study after study has shown this to be absolutely false. And yet we go on doing it. The real solution comes from being able to step outside the class, outside the box. Now, there is another kind of thing. What we were talking about a little while ago was a game without any end. Now, there's another phrase they use, which is more of the same. And that's when the solution that you are proposing actually becomes a part of your problem. And so it just goes on and on and on. Here's an example that you probably all had. If you have something you need to do the next day and you want to be refreshed and rested, and on the night before that day where you want to be refreshed, you suddenly find yourself an insomniac. So you say to yourself, go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep. And the more you say it, the more adrenaline you get. So that suddenly it will be impossible for you to go to sleep because your solution, which is to make yourself go to sleep, is actually making you wider and wider awake. That's the case of your solution now adding to the problem and making it really impossible for you to get there. Now, imagine yourself a therapist. How would you step out of that system and go to the second order level change and get this guy to sleep? Guess what they found worked? No? That's right. They said, now I want you to lie down here and keep your eyes open as wide as you can and keep yourself wide awake. Well, he gets so bored with it, he just doesn't. In other words, you yanked him away from his solution, which turned out to be his problem. And you went outside the system, because the system you're working in is sleepy. Therefore, you want to get to sleep. Outside the system, of course, is being awake. And you jump to that level. I can imagine some of these things backfiring without going into any detail. But it is hard in complex social systems to know exactly how to do it. I've been trying some on my little 3.5-year-old. It's very interesting. And my wife once jumped right out of the class and went to out of the membership and up to the class level. Once my second daughter was having such a rough time in school because of reading, and I wasn't far enough along to know what to do then. And it got so bad with the teacher hollering and fussing at her that she just didn't want to go to school anymore. And we couldn't, and we just had to drag her out of bed. So one Tuesday morning, for the 27th time, she just said, "I'm not going to school and I'm not getting out of bed, period." And usually we went through all of the fussing and everything. And my wife was so exhausted. She said, well, I think Sarah said, "I'm not going to school." And Nancy didn't say anything. And Sarah said, "I said I'm not going to school." And Nancy said, "No comment," and went right downstairs. You know what Sarah did? She immediately jumped out of bed and looked after on the banister, and she said, "What kind of a mother is that?" Because mothers are supposed to insist that you get out of bed and go to school. And suddenly she jumped out of that type, and it made her get out of bed. And it so infuriated her, distracted her, that she suddenly found herself dressing and coming down for breakfast. And then went off to school. Now, I don't know whether it would work 10 days in a row. I sort of doubt it. But the point is, there is a shift in reaction once you break out of the imprisonment. And you just have to find out how to do it. And I think this is, I did it myself once, and I didn't even know the theory of type or anything, but I worked with a client for 6 years as a therapist. And it was more complicated because he was a friend too. And I would suggest this and suggest that. And on this particular occasion, we were driving. He was driving. We were in the car. He called up and said he felt suicidal. Could he come over and could we drive around for a while? So I said yes. So I began suggesting things that we might do. He said, "Oh, you've suggested that. It does a tired, stale suggestion. Have you got anything else?" It was so awful. I mean, everything I tried to do, he just, put me down. And what happened to it, my anger got to such a point that I stepped outside the role of therapist. In fact, I abandoned it entirely. I said to him, "Pull over to the side of the road." He pulled over the road, and I said, "You want to know something? I am sick and tired of all your problems, and from this day on, I don't want to hear none of them from you. Not one!" And I thought, my gosh, if he commits suicide tomorrow, I'll really feel awful. But boy, did I feel good. He looked so stunned. He put the car in gear, turned the music on, and drove me home. And you know, to this day, we had the most wonderful time together. I never saw him again on a problem. And really, his problem stopped. And really, what I come to realize was that I was a part of the problem. Because whenever he got lonesome, whenever he did this, there was always good old me there. He would give up anything to go see if I could save him from hanging himself. And so he could never have the experience of relying on his own inner resources, because I wouldn't let him. Now, I'm not saying that this is what you should do with every client. I think you might get sued, or you may have a suicide. But in this case, what I was doing was a part of the problem. I thought it was the solution. And really, he's doing terrifically well. He's gotten married. He's gotten a doctorate.
Attention. This is Theorito's taxi is here. This is Theorito's taxi. Betsy is here.
But we sure wouldn't want her to miss it. Now, I want to talk about 3 ways of mishandling difficulties, which creates problems. And then I want to get you, then we're going to have a break, eat a few things, and then I want to get you into some small groups thinking about some problem the group will mutually identify. See if you can't see what your presuppositions are, and see if you can't at least identify what the member level is and the class level is, so that you know where to jump, even if you don't make the jump yet. Here's 3 ways of mishandling difficulties, which creates